Hello everybody, this is Lou again with my second video, and this one is on a role-playing game I've just found recently called Mazes and Minotaurs. It's actually a really old game, originally released in 1972 by Legendary Game Studios. Great name, right? And it's actually a really good game. I like it a lot. Um, I guess it's kind of been phased out in a way because nowadays you can play D&D in almost any setting. But the setting of Mazes and Minotaurs is basically the Greek pantheon, the Greek age of like Hercules and Jason and the Argonauts and that kind of thing. So, you play as like Greek warriors and hoplites and nymphs and things like that, and you fight things like minotaurs and sea dragons. And it may sound played out and cliche, and maybe it is, but I think it's done really well here, and I just think it's really cool to have that kind of setting within a game and its own rules instead of, say, buying a supplement book for Dungeons and Dragons and using that. Okay, now what do I like about the system? Well, for one, it's almost like the GURPS system or the Shadowrun system in the way that it only uses D6s. Now, I know that may sound sacrilegious to some of the more hardcore Dungeons and Dragons players, and believe me, I play Dungeons and Dragons. I like it. I love it. I love using the D20s and the D8s and the D10s and all that cool stuff. But sometimes you just play Dungeons and Dragons so much and you're reaching for your D8 or your D4 or your D12 or whatever, and sometimes you just want the system to be simplified. And that's why I occasionally like a game that only utilizes D6s. Sometimes it just makes the gameplay a lot faster and smoother, and it also has the advantage of making it a lot simpler for new players to pick it up. Of course, there's always, how many d6s do I roll, but at least you don't have the noob looking at the dice and saying, what die do I roll again? And in the middle of combat, he picks up his d8 instead of his d20 and wonders why he doesn't hit anything. Now, a little bit about the game. There's only 6 character classes as far as the first edition goes, which isn't bad, and of course, you can always make your own kind of class. But to make a class and a character, this is basically how it starts off. You roll each character's basic stat, just like in D&D. You roll 4d6 and you drop the lowest number. It's simple and it works. And your 6 stats that you have in this game are might, which is your physical strength. You have your skill, which is basically like your dexterity. The book defines it as training and weapon mastery. You have your luck, which is basically your fortune. Not like money, like it's your luck. You have your wits, which are your intelligence and alertness, basically what you need for a magic user that's not of a deity. You have faith, which is your religious devotion, which is really important for characters like priests. And you have your grace, which is basically your charisma. It would translate to your charisma in other games. And, just like any other game, because you're rolling 3d6, the lowest you can have is 3 in a skill, which the book defines as abysmal, and you get a -3 modifier to it. And the highest you can get is 18, which the book describes as exceptional, which you can get a +3, which in this game is actually, like, really fucking good. Another thing about the game that's kind of interesting is that unlike in AD&D, where you had your AC and your THACO, basically your attack rating, your defense rating, this has a much more simplified system of that. Like I said, you roll for all your stats, and they all have modifiers, just like in almost every other RPG. And in excuse me, in Mazes and Minotaurs, you only have three different kind of uh, character modifiers. This is what I mean. You have your danger evasion, which is just what it sounds like, which equals in whatever class you are to your luck modifier plus your wits modifier. You have your first reaction, which is your grace plus your luck modifiers, and you have your mystic fortitude, which is your faith modifier plus your luck modifier. And things like this, it sounds really simple, but sometimes simpleness is what you want in an RPG. I mean, there's also combat modifiers. Your melee is your might plus your skill. Your missile modifier, which is things like bows and throwing Greek fire, is your skill plus your luck. Makes sense, right? Your initiative is your skill plus your wits, and things like that. It's not a hard system to pick up, like at all. I mean, I read the book for about 20 minutes and I felt like I could just pick it up and play, which I don't know about everybody else, but I don't get that feeling much with RPGs. I was recently reading the third edition of Shadowrun, and I was a big second edition player, but picking up third edition, I feel like I'm completely lost. It doesn't feel like Shadowrun to me, and it feels like I'm learning a whole new game. So, what kind of classes are there in Mazes and Minotaurs? Well, like I said, there's six, but of course, if you have the right kind of GM or DM or whatever you want to call him, he can let you modify things. The six classes are barbarians, which are basically like your barbarians or fighters in D&D. They're your brute force kind of guys. You have your spearmen or hoplites, which is basically like an elite soldier, which is different than a barbarian. They're more skilled in ways and not necessarily as strong. As the book describes it, a barbarian is an offensive class, where a hoplite or a spearman is actually more of a defensive class, and he gets lots of bonuses to his AC, or his DC, as the book calls it, his defense counter. There's also nobles, which are they're not exactly like a noble you would think of. They do fight, and they do have decent HP and strength and things. What they do excel in, though, are things like luck and charisma. They're basically a charismatic knight. There's also priests, which are magic users, which are basically like your cleric class. And the thing with a priest is that they have to adhere to a certain god or goddess, and they have to follow that goddess, do what they say, obey by their rules, and things like that. Although, because they are blessed by this goddess, they do have, or god or goddess, they have very strong magical powers. On the other end, there are sorcerers or sorceresses, depending on your gender. And what they are is they are a mage. Dark or they're not a dark or evil mage, but they don't follow any kind of god or goddess. They are of their own accord, and this makes them a little more dependent, but at the same time makes them a little less strong because they don't have the blessing of a god or goddess. And finally, there's nymphs. Nymphs are interesting, and I hope that I'm saying that right. Anybody who wishes to correct me, please do. Nymphs are a little more limiting. Their thing is that they are basically almost like a druid class. They carry no armor, no weapons. They don't have any starting wealth like all the other character classes, and they are only allowed to be women, which every other character class is defined. Well, you might want to do this, but this says in the book, it directly says nymphs are exclusively female. There is no such thing as a male nymph. Very interesting, I thought. Very interesting. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this RPG you can find at mazesandminotaurs.com and is completely free. You don't have to worry about piracy or torrents or, you know, you'll sleep well at night knowing that this RPG is completely free and given out and that is so awesome. The last thing I have to say about the RPG before I just read the whole book in front of you is the one complaint I have with it. And that is, with each character class has a prime requisite or a prime skill. In other words, if you want to be a barbarian, when you roll your stats, the book says that you have to put your highest stat in might. If you don't, you can't be a barbarian. Just like if you want to be a hoplite, you have to put your highest skill in. I'm sorry, you have to put your highest attribute in skill. I don't really like that. I mean, I guess if I was DMing this game, I could house rule it, or GMing as you prefer. I could house rule it that you do not have to do this. But I find it. I know what I can understand what the creators were going for. If you're a barbarian, you're probably going to put your highest skill in strength. I mean, why wouldn't you? Unless it was for some kind of role-playing reason. Maybe you want to be a really smart barbarian, or maybe you were a noble who was forced to be a barbarian, so that's why your highest skill is in luck. But besides role-playing reasons, I don't like the limiting nature of that part of the system. But that being my only complaint, I can say that is a small cost for such a great free RPG. Well, everybody, have fun, stay role playing, and play some mazes and minotaurs.